What if I told you that working just 12 extra weeks at the very end of your career gives you the exact same financial boost as, sacrificing a chunk of your paycheck every single month for 30 straight years?
It sounds completely absurd when you put it like that.
Right. Like, just think about that for a second. You spend 3 decades, skipping vacations, driving a 10-year-old car, and stressing over a 1% increase in your savings rate.
Yeah, the classic grind.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the math says you could have achieved the exact same result just by, staying at your desk for 3 more months.
It really does sound like a gimmick or, some kind of late-night infomercial pitch, but it is actually one of the most rigorously tested findings in modern labor economics.
Wow.
Yeah, the return on investment for delaying retirement by even a fractional amount it's just astronomically high. It fundamentally breaks the way we've been taught to think about financial planning.
Okay, well, let's unpack this. Because today, our mission on this deep dive is to look at the massive global structural shift in how we retire. We are decoding a huge stack of new international legislation, policy monitors, and economic research.
And it all points to one undeniable reality.
Exactly. The traditional hard stop retirement is dead. We are moving into an era where governments they're doing everything in their power to keep you economically active.
They have to. The demographics demand it.
Right. So we're looking at the sprawling 2025 to 2029 Belgian pension reform, Spain's royal decree 416/2026, Greece's law 5078/2023, data from the European Union's Eurofound, and some really fascinating research from the U.S. Federal Reserve and the National Bureau of Economic Research.
And if there's one overarching theme across all these sources, it is that more retirees are staying on the job.
Yeah.
And new pension rules are being explicitly designed to encourage declared formal work while, actually increasing future benefits for those pensioners. Governments are realizing they just can't afford a massive shadow economy of seniors working under the table.
So if you were listening to this right now, whether you're, trying to figure out your company's HR policy for an aging workforce, or you're just looking at your own retirement horizon, you have to understand the mechanics of this shift.
It's critical.
Because the map you were given, the one where you hit 65, grab a slice of sheet cake in the break room, and just never look at a spreadsheet again, that map is going to lead you right off a cliff.
We really have to start by looking at the demographic reality that's forcing this change. The old system, it was built on a very specific demographic pyramid, right?
A lot of young people at the bottom.
Exactly. A massive base of young workers paying taxes to support a tiny peak of retirees who, frankly, they just didn't live very long after they stopped working.
Right. When Social Security was designed, life expectancy was completely different. But now we have plummeting birth rates and rapidly expanding life expectancies. The pyramid is, it's turning into a cylinder.
Or turning completely upside down in some countries. To give you some context on the sheer scale of the panic here, a Eurofound report projects that the old age dependency ratio in the European Union will hit 52% by 2050.
Let's do the math on that for the listener. A 52% dependency ratio means that for every 2 working age people, there will be more than 1 person of retirement age, depending on the system.
Yes. And the math simply does not work. You cannot tax those 2 young workers heavily enough to support the retiree without completely crushing the economy.
It's just mathematically impossible.
Right. So the only lever governments have left to pull is to keep the older population in the workforce longer. And before we get into the heavy government legislation, the sticks and the carrots they're using to force this issue, we really have to look at the raw financial power of working just a little bit longer.
Which brings us back to that 12-week statistic I mentioned at the top. I found this in the working paper from the National Bureau of Economic Research, NBER paper 242226.
It's a fantastic paper.
It really is. I was reading through their methodology, and they were looking specifically at the financial impact of delaying retirement. And they found that working just 3 to 6 months longer boosts a person's retirement income as much as increasing their retirement savings rate by a full percentage point over 30 years of employment.
The underlying mechanics of that study are fascinating because, while it challenges the fundamental dogma of personal finance.
Right, because we are constantly told to start early, to let compound interest do the heavy lifting over decades.
Exactly. But the NBER data shows that the leverage you have at the very end of your career is actually far more powerful than the incremental savings you managed during your prime working years.
I look at it like compound interest in reverse. Instead of focusing entirely on how much you pour into the top of the bucket over your whole life, you can drastically change the math simply by delaying when you pull the plug at the bottom.
That's a highly accurate way to visualize it, because when you delay pulling that plug, you are triggering 3 simultaneous financial mechanics that, they stack on top of each other.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first is obvious. You're making additional contributions to your retirement accounts while you continue to earn a salary. You aren't just delaying the drain, you're still actively filling the bucket.
Right. And the second mechanic is that by delaying your withdrawals, you're leaving your existing money in the market to continue growing. You aren't liquidating assets, so those assets have another year or even just another 6 months to compound.
Exactly. But the third mechanic is where the real magic happens, and this is what the NBER researchers really highlighted. By working longer, you are shrinking the window of time that your savings actually need to support you.
Let's break that down, because the paper heavily references a joint survivor life annuity. For anyone who isn't a certified financial planner, can we explain how that actually functions on the back end?
Absolutely. So an annuity is essentially an insurance product. You hand over a lump sum of your savings to an insurance company, and in exchange, they guarantee you a set monthly payout for the rest of your life. A joint survivor life annuity means it covers both you and your spouse. It continues paying out until the second person passes away. The NBER used an inflation-indexed version of this as their baseline for calculating retirement security.
So the insurance company's entire business model is based on calculating exactly how long they think you and your spouse are going to live, right?
Correct. The insurance company is taking on the longevity risk. If you buy this annuity at age 62, they have to plan on paying you every single month for potentially 30 or 35 years.
That's a lot of payments.
It is a massive liability. So because of that liability, the monthly payout they offer you at 62 is going to be relatively low. But if you wait until you are 66 or 67 to buy that exact same annuity, the math shifts dramatically in your favor.
Because the insurance company knows the payout window just shrank by 4 or 5 years.
Precisely. It becomes significantly cheaper to purchase that guaranteed income stream. So you have more money saved because you worked longer, that money had more time to grow, and the product you are buying to secure your retirement just went on sale because you're older.
Wow.
When you combine those 3 factors, a 66-year-old who works 1 extra year and delays claiming Social Security sees a 7.75% rise in their inflation-adjusted retirement income.
Nearly an 8% bump in your standard of living for the rest of your life just for working 1 more year.
Yep.
And the crazy thing is, 83% of that increase comes purely from the rise in the Social Security benefits themselves. It's not even reliant on the stock market having a good year.
And we know this works in the real world. The Federal Reserve paper we reviewed looked at the historical impact of the delayed retirement credit, or the DRC, in the United States.
Right, the DRC is the financial bonus the government gives you for delaying your Social Security claim past your normal retirement age.
Yes. And the Fed's data shows that historically, whenever policymakers raised the DRC, making the financial reward for delaying more lucrative, it triggered massive labor supply increases among men aged 65 to 69.
People respond to the math.
People understand the math. When you actually reward them for staying, the employment rate for older cohorts shoots up.
Okay, I have a major question here, though. If the financial benefit to the individual is this massive work, I mean, if working a few extra months is a virtual magic wand for your personal retirement security, why do governments need to pass massive sweeping laws to force people to stay in the workforce?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right, if the carrot is that juicy and people generally respond to financial incentives, why do we need the heavy government stick?
Because human psychology often overrides pure mathematics, especially when it comes to burnout and the desire for freedom.
Okay.
Behavioral economics tells us that if given a socially acceptable off-ramp, a huge percentage of the population will take it, even if it means sacrificing future income. The Eurofound data reflects this perfectly. There is a deeply ingrained cultural preference for early retirement in many Western nations.
People just want out.
They do, and governments are looking at that 52% dependency ratio we talked about, and they realize they cannot afford to rely on voluntary delays. The math of the welfare state requires participation, so they are moving from nudges to mandates.
Which brings us to the SNCC.
Yeah.
And looking at this stack of research, No one is wielding a heavier stick right now than Belgium. I spent hours reading through the 2025 to 2029 Belgian pension reform, which was published in the Belgian Official Journal in June 2026.
It goes into full effect by 2027, right?
Yes, and it is a sprawling, aggressive piece of legislation. They are fundamentally changing what it means to earn a year of your pension.
They are structurally redesigning the off-ramp by tightening the net on early exits. Historically, the Belgian system had quite a bit of slack in it.
Yeah, but previously, if you wanted to retire early, a calendar year was counted as a career year if you simply had 104 days of work, or what they called assimilated days.
Let's define assimilated days for a moment, because it's a crucial concept in European labor law. Assimilated days are periods where you are not actively working, but the government treats you as if you are for the purpose of calculating your pension.
Like sick leave.
Exactly. This usually covers periods of illness, maternity leave, or certain types of authorized unemployment.
So under the old rules, you only needed 104 days, which is essentially working 2 days a week for a year to get credit for a full career year toward early retirement. But the new reform raises that requirement drastically. Starting in 2027, to qualify for early retirement, a year of employment requires 156 days of work.
That is a 50% increase in the baseline requirement.
It's massive.
It is, and the immediate macroeconomic effect of this is that hundreds of thousands of workers who thought they were on track to retire at 60 or 62 are suddenly going to audit their careers and find they're short by a few years. They will literally be forced to remain in the labor market just to meet the prerequisite.
But the 156-day rule is just the velvet glove. The real iron fist of this reform is the new pension penalty, which they call the Malice. If you decide to retire early, you now face a permanent percentage reduction in your gross pension unless you meet a new, incredibly strict double requirement.
This is where the behavioral design of the legislation is most evident. They are heavily penalizing inconsistency.
Yeah.
To avoid the permanent penalty, an individual must prove a career of 35 years where every single one of those years has at least 156 work days. Concurrently, you must have a total of 7,020 worked days across your entire career.
Both of those.
Yes. If you miss either of those marks, if you only have 34 years of 156 days, or if you hit the 35 years but fall short of the 7,020 total days and you retire before the statutory retirement age, you are penalized.
I was doing the math on this, and it is punishing. The penalty scales based on your birth year. If you were born between 1961 and 1965, you lose 2% of your gross pension for every year you retire early.
Which is already significant.
Right. But if you were born between 1966 and 1974, it jumps to 4% per year. And for anyone born in 1975 or later, you lose 5% of your gross pension for every single year you step away early.
Think about the compounding effect of that. If a worker born in 1976 wants to retire 3 years before the standard age, and they happen to fall short of that massive 7,020-day threshold, they lose 15% of their pension.
Just go on.
Not just for those 3 years, but permanently for the rest of their life. It is a severe financial disincentive designed specifically to punish those who haven't maintained a highly consistent, highly active presence in the labor market.
And they are stacking this with what they call limited fictitious salary rules. I need to explain this because this completely changes how unemployment is handled at the end of a career.
This one is particularly harsh.
It really is. Under the old system, let's say you were laid off at age 59. You took something called a time credit or an end of career break. The pension system historically calculated those missing periods using a fictitious salary based on your previous actual earnings.
Right, to protect your average.
Exactly. So if you were making a great salary as a regional manager and you got downsized, your pension didn't take a massive hit just because you were unemployed for your final 2 years. The system pretended you were still making your manager's salary.
But starting in 2025, for pensions kicking in by 2027 or later, that protection is completely gone. That fictitious salary for unemployment and end of career breaks is going to be capped at the minimum wage ceiling.
That is brutal. So not only do you have to work significantly more days just to avoid a 15% lifetime penalty, but if you happen to get laid off in your early 60s, the government is valuing those gap years at minimum wage, which acts as an anchor dragging down your final average pension amount.
It is a deliberate, two-pronged squeeze. They are financially rewarding actual effective work and severely discounting periods of inactivity. The macroeconomic goal is to make it so financially painful to be unemployed in your 60s that you will take almost any job to keep your day count high and your salary average up.
Now, when I first read these rules, 156 days a year, 35 years straight, 7,020 lifetime days, My immediate reaction was that this is incredibly unfair to anyone who doesn't work a traditional 9-to-5 corporate job.
It definitely looks that way at first glance.
Right. I mean, what about part-time workers? What about people in the gig economy with wildly fluctuating schedules? Or think about a nurse who works insane, exhausting hours for 6 months and then intentionally drops to part-time to recover. Doesn't this flat 156-day rule punish them unfairly just because their schedule is erratic?
That is a very astute critique, and the Belgian legislators clearly recognize the political liability of punishing the part-time workforce, which we should note is predominantly female. So the reform includes mathematically intricate safety nets to protect workers on the margins.
They introduced 2 specific buffering mechanisms, spare days and balance days.
Yes.
I spent some time decoding the math on these, and it's actually quite clever. The easiest way to think about balance days is to compare it to the old rollover minutes on early cellular data plans. Do you remember those?
I do, where if you didn't use all your minutes one month, they rolled over to the next.
Exactly. So Belgium defines a half-time worker as someone working between 150 and 162 days a year. That's a very tight window. If you are hovering right around that half-time mark, but your schedule fluctuates, the system will look at a consecutive period of your employment.
Let's use a hypothetical.
Sure. Let's say you have a heavy year where you picked up extra shifts and worked 160 days. The threshold is 156, so you have a surplus of 4 days.
Right.
The next year things are slow and you only work 153 days. You are short by 3 days. Under the strict rule, that second year wouldn't count toward your 35-year requirement, and you'd face a massive lifetime penalty.
But with balance days, the system automatically intervenes.
Right. It takes the 4 surplus days from your heavy year and rolls them over to your light year, filling the 3-day hole. Now, both years count as full 156-day career years. You essentially get to smooth out your erratic schedule over a block of time.
And if that rollover math still isn't enough to save a year, the system dips into your spare days. The reform grants every single worker a universal buffer of 5 spare days across their entire career.
Like wildcards.
Exactly. If you have a year where you only hit 154 days and you have no balance days to roll over, the system automatically takes 2 of your spare days and applies them to push you over the 156 threshold.
So you can use all 5 days to save one terrible year that only had 151 days, or you can sprinkle them across 5 different years where you were just 1 day short. It's an automated defense mechanism against the Malice Penalty.
But there is a catch.
There's always a catch.
They are strictly for meeting the 156-day annual threshold. They do not count toward your total 7,020 lifetime day requirement. You still have to put in the actual lifetime hours.
Which demonstrates the dual intent of the policy. They are providing mathematical grace for minor scheduling fluctuations, but they are holding completely firm on the macro requirement of long-term labor participation.
Furthermore, they are taking a very specific stance on medical absences. The reform ensures that periods of absence for medical reasons are fully assimilated into the 5,000-day requirement for the guaranteed minimum pension.
So they aren't punishing people for getting sick.
Exactly. The behavioral intent is clear. They aren't trying to punish people whose bodies give out. They are trying to corner people who are voluntarily exiting the workforce early.
And you can really see that aggressive intent when you look at how this reform targets civil servants. It is systematically dismantling decades of privileged retirement schemes.
Historically, public sector workers in Belgium, like in many European nations, frankly have enjoyed incredibly generous early retirement pathways as a trade-off for lower public sector wages. But as the dependency ratio shifts, the state can no longer afford to fund those early exits.
Take the military, for example. The automatic early retirement age for soldiers is being phased out based on birth year and rank. If you are an officer born in 1971, you might still squeak out at 57. But if you were born in 1981 or later, your privileged scheme is completely terminated.
You are thrown into the general pool and have to meet the exact same age and career conditions as a private sector accountant.
They're doing the same thing to the HR rail workers, phasing out their early retirement options over a 10-year transition period.
But the most impactful change for civil servants is the alteration to the reference pay calculation. This is a structural earthquake for public sector wealth accumulation.
Saw this. Currently, a civil servant's pension in Belgium is calculated based on their average salary over their final 10 career years, right?
Correct. So the obvious strategy is to grind for 30 years, get a major promotion to a director-level role at age 55, ride out those last 10 years at a high salary, and your entire pension is artificially inflated to match that peak earning period.
That system created an enormous unfunded liability for the state. So the new reform systematically extends that reference period. For those retiring in 2027 and later, the reference period scales up based on birth year, and it will eventually reach 45 years.
Wow.
They're going to average your pay across your entire working life. They're going to factor in what you made as a junior clerk in your 20s alongside what you made as a director in your 60s.
That is going to drastically lower the final pension amount for future civil servants. The era of the generous final salary public pension is over.
It is a painful correction, but a necessary one from a macroeconomic perspective. If governments are going to enforce the 52% dependency ratio survival plan, they cannot have public money subsidizing healthy 58-year-olds to play golf.
Well, okay, but this raises a massive human issue.
What's that?
If governments are making it incredibly painful to retire early, if they're locking you into a 35-year grind and threatening a 15% lifetime penalty if you slip up, they have to provide a realistic, humane way for people to step down slowly. You can't just force a 66-year-old with arthritis to work a grinding 50-hour week until they drop. That is a recipe for a public health crisis.
You're touching on the core tension of active aging. You need an off-ramp that balances economic output with physiological reality. And if Belgium is demonstrating the heavy stick, Spain is offering an incredibly sophisticated carrot to solve exactly this problem.
Let's dive into Spain's Royal Decree 416-2026. This was born out of the Toledo Pact, which we should probably define. What exactly is the Toledo Pact?
Right, so the Toledo Pact is a long-standing cross-party political agreement in Spain that dates back to 1995. Its entire purpose is to periodically review and recommend structural reforms to the Spanish Social Security and pension system to ensure its financial sustainability, basically keeping it insulated from short-term partisan politics.
That makes sense.
This new decree, which is effective August 28, 2026, is a direct result of their latest recommendations on how to handle the aging workforce.
And what they've done is totally redefine what they call flexible retirement. Now, Spain has had a flexible retirement law on the books for over 2 decades, but from what I read, it was incredibly rigid and almost nobody used it.
It was too restrictive. The hours were capped, the tax implications were confusing, and the bureaucracy was prohibitive. The new decree massively expands the options, aiming for a highly customizable, gradual transition out of the workforce.
How does the new one work?
Under the new rules, a Spanish retiree can combine their pension with part-time work, but the range is much wider. You can work anywhere between 33% and 80% of a full-time schedule. So you could work 2 days a week, or you could work 4 days a week.
And the financial mechanics are beautifully straightforward. Your pension is simply reduced in inverse proportion to the hours you work. If you choose to work 50% of a normal week, you receive 50% of your pension, plus your part-time salary from your employer.
But the true brilliance of the Spanish decree, the thing that really caught my eye, is how they incentivize the start of this transition. They have introduced something called the 6-month bonus.
The 6-month bonus.
Yeah. Spain wants to ensure you actually take a real physiological break from the labor market before you return as a flexible worker. They don't want you just switching your hours on a Friday and calling yourself semi-retired on Monday. So they mandate a 6-month waiting period.
Okay.
If you wait at least 6 months after your official retirement date before returning to flexible work, they give you a massive bonus on your pension payout.
The percentages on this bonus are staggering when you consider the long-term costs to the state. It really shows how desperate they are to keep this institutional memory in the workforce.
If you come back after your 6-month break working between 55% and 80% of a full schedule, the government increases your compatible pension by an additional 25%.
Wow.
If you work fewer hours, between 33% and 55%, they still boost your pension by 15%. They are literally paying you a massive financial premium to take a 6-month vacation to decompress.
From a labor psychology standpoint, this is a masterclass in policy design. There is an academic paper we reviewed called The Political Economy of Active Aging, which analyzes this exact shift.
Oh, right.
For generations, retirement has been an abrupt cessation of work. You go from 100 miles an hour to 0 overnight. That abrupt stop creates what sociologists call an institutional hangover. The worker is burned out, exhausted, and often suffers a loss of identity, while the employer instantly loses decades of unwritten institutional knowledge.
Now, I want to push back on this 6-month mandate, though.
Okay, why?
Because Newton's first law of motion applies to humans too, right? A body at rest tends to stay at rest. If I finally get out of the rat race and I spend 6 months sleeping in, traveling, and playing with my grandkids, you are going to have a really hard time convincing me to set an alarm clock and go back to the office, even for a 25% bonus. Doesn't this forced gap kill the momentum that keeps older workers employed?
It's a valid concern, and it's one the policymakers absolutely debated. However, the data on burnout suggests the opposite is true for the demographic they are targeting. The 6-month break allows for critical physical and mental recovery.
Like a sabbatical.
Exactly. If a worker transitions immediately to part-time without a break, they still carry the stress and resentment of their full-time career. They just have a slightly shorter week. The 6-month gap acts as a psychological reset. When they return, they aren't returning as a tired veteran. They are returning on their own terms, as a highly compensated part-time consultant. The 25% bonus is the financial catalyst that overcomes the inertia of rest, making the return highly lucrative.
That makes sense. You're resetting the relationship between the worker and the work. And Spain didn't stop at salaried employees with this decree. They opened this up to the self-employed for the first time ever.
This is a monumental shift. Historically, flexible retirement in Spain was strictly for salaried W-2 style workers. Now, self-employed individuals, freelancers, small business owners, consultants can claim 25% of their pension while continuing to operate their businesses. But, as with all government benefits, there is a very strict catch to prevent systemic abuse.
Right, because if I've owned a bakery for 20 years and I turn 65, I can just throw my hands up, say I'm retired, and then walk right back into my bakery the next day and keep running it. Except now the government is handing me 25% of my pension on top of my profits. It would just be free money for doing exactly what I was already doing.
Precisely. To prevent that specific type of double dipping, the Spanish law includes a 3-year lockout clause. It requires that the self-employed pensioner must not have been registered as self-employed in the 3 years immediately prior to their retirement date.
Wait, so if I am a lifelong freelancer, or I'm that baker who has been running the shop for 2 decades, I am completely locked out of this 25% flexible retirement benefit.
Under this specific scheme, yes, you are entirely excluded. The rule is explicitly designed to force a real discontinuity. If you are a salaried corporate employee your whole life, you officially retire, take your 6-month break, and then decide to start a small, self-employed consulting business in your retirement, you qualify for the 25% pension while you build your new business. But established self-employed workers cannot access it.
That feels incredibly punitive to small business owners. I can see why self-employed advocacy groups in Spain have been heavily criticizing this. It creates 2 classes of retirees.
It absolutely does, and it highlights the delicate, often clumsy balancing act governments are performing. They want to incentivize new labor supply from people who would otherwise stop working entirely, but they are terrified of cannibalizing their own budgets by subsidizing labor that was going to happen anyway.
Which perfectly transitions us to what happens when governments get that balance wrong. When tax laws and pension deductions are too punitive or too heavily means-tested, they don't actually stop retirees from working. They just force them to hide. They force them into a massive, hidden shadow economy.
Let's look at the data from Australia because it provides a textbook example of how a punitive system actively harms both the state and the individual. National Seniors Australia has been running a massive, highly visible advocacy campaign about this exact issue.
The Australian problem comes down to the age pension earnings limit. Currently, if you're an Australian receiving the age pension and you decide to take on some part-time work, you are allowed to earn up to a very modest limit. But the second you earn a single dollar over that limit, the government cuts your pension by 50 cents.
It functions as an incredibly steep marginal tax rate, specifically targeting older workers. When you factor in the 50-cent pension reduction, plus regular income taxes, plus transportation and costs of working, the effective tax rate can easily exceed 60% or 70%.
The financial incentive to work legally is completely obliterated, and the results are exactly what you would expect. According to the data, only 3.3% of Australian-age pensioners declare earnings from employment. Compare that to New Zealand, which has a much more permissive system, where 24.8% of pensioners are formally employed.
If we look at the macro-level impact, it's not that Australian seniors are fundamentally lazier or less capable than New Zealand seniors. It is purely a behavioral response to hostile policy. When the system penalizes you for formal work, you get 2 terrible socioeconomic outcomes.
That's the first one.
First, it pushes highly experienced seniors out of critical sectors that are currently desperate for workers like healthcare, childcare, early education, and agriculture.
And the second outcome is that for the seniors who genuinely need the extra income to survive drive inflation, they are pushed into the black economy. They take undeclared, cash-in-hand jobs. They do under-the-table landscaping or cash consulting or off-the-books childcare. This means they have zero labor protection, zero workplace injury insurance, and the government collects absolutely zero tax revenue. It is a massive lose-lose scenario.
But then you look at Greece. Greece recently faced a very similar crisis of an aging workforce participating in a shadow economy. But their recent reform, Law 50782024, took a radically different, highly pragmatic approach to solving it.
Greece executed what looks like one of the most successful structural shifts in recent European memory. Previously, Greek working pensioners faced a flat, punitive 30% deduction on their entire pension if they declared any work. Unsurprisingly, almost no one officially declared their work. The new law completely abolished that 30% deduction.
They erased it entirely. The paradigm shifted from penalizing the existing pension to lightly taxing the new income. They introduced a flat 10% special contribution on the new salary earned from the post-retirement job. Or, if the pensioner is self-employed, it's a 50% bump in their main pension branch contribution.
Let's focus on that 10% flat tax on the new salary, because behaviorally, that is so much more intuitive. Instead of the government reaching into the pension money you feel you already earned over a 40-year career, they just take a modest slice of the new money you are actively making. It feels like a fair trade rather than a confiscation. What was the result of this shift?
The results were immediate, explosive, and frankly, a massive vindication for the policymakers. Before the reform, there were only 36,000 registered working pensioners in the entire country of Greece.
That's 36,000.
Yeah. Following the implementation of the new law and the launch of the digital declaration platform, that number skyrocketed to over 230,000 registered working pensioners.
They brought almost 200,000 people out of the shadow economy and into the formal tax base practically overnight. That is a staggering policy success.
It is. And the financial benefits for those workers are highly tangible. Low-wage working pensioners, those taking on very light part-time work, are seeing modest monthly pension increases of 16 to 25 euro. But high-wage earners, those making over 12,020 a month in their post-retirement jobs, are securing future pension increases averaging up to 120 euros a month. They are actively building greater future security by participating formally. And importantly, Greece foresaw a major behavioral hurdle and neutralized it.
You were talking about the bracket creep protection. I want to dive into this because bracket creep is a massive fear for anyone, regardless of age, who is considering taking on extra work.
Explain how bracket creep generally works for the listener.
Okay, in a progressive tax system, your income is taxed in tiers or brackets. If you earn a little extra money from a part-time job, that extra income can sometimes push your total gross income just over the line into a higher tax bracket. Because that higher tax rate applies to the money in that new tier, you can sometimes end up in a situation where you worked an extra 10 hours, but you actually take home less total net money than if you hadn't worked at all, because the new tax rate ate all the gains.
Yeah.
It's a massive disincentive.
Exactly. And Greece has a pensioners' solidarity contribution, which operates on progressive brackets. They knew that if pensioners worked and that new income pushed them into a higher solidarity bracket, the workers would immediately quit and go back to the shadow economy.
Right.
So the new law dictates that the additional pension benefit earned by working will not push the pensioner into a higher solidarity contribution bracket. They legally freeze the individual's bracket at the exact level it was before the increase, completely protecting the worker's financial gains.
That is just brilliant, pragmatic policy design. It proves definitively that punitive pension taxes do not keep seniors from working. They just push them into the shadows. When you reform the system to be transparent, fair, and mathematically beneficial to the worker, you instantly fill critical labor shortages, you generate brand new tax revenue, and you increase the financial security of your aging population.
It is the ultimate proof of concept for the active aging economic model. You align the state's need for labor with the individual's need for income without triggering resentment.
So we have looked at the raw mathematical power of delaying retirement. We've looked at the heavy enforcement stick in Belgium, the highly incentivized carrot in Spain, and the shadow economy solutions in Greece. It is crystal clear that the legal and financial frameworks are changing rapidly across the globe to keep older workers on the job.
Without a doubt.
But laws on paper and macroeconomic data only tell half the story. what is actually happening inside the workplace. When a 68-year-old decides to stay on the job, what is the human reality, the psychological experience of that decision?
To understand the human element, we have to look closely at the Eurofound report. This report provides incredibly granular pan-European data on the realities of the aging workforce. The macro trend aligns perfectly with everything we've discussed. The EU retention rate for older workers, meaning people staying with the exact same employer, increased from 44% in 2010 to 57% in 2022.
That is a massive jump. Over half of older workers are now staying put in their roles.
Yes, but the report reveals a very dark side to that statistic. While they are staying in their jobs longer, if an older worker does happen to lose their job, whether through corporate downsizing, restructuring, or illness, they face a 13.5 percentage point higher risk of long-term unemployment compared to mid-career workers.
So if you are 62 and you get laid off, the odds are stacked heavily against you ever finding another equivalent role.
Exactly. Once they are pushed out of their established ecosystem, systemic ageism, hiring bias, and the assumption that they will be slow to adapt to new technology make it incredibly difficult for them to re-enter the workforce. In 2022, less than 1 in 5 older job seekers in the EU re-entered the labor market after a period of unemployment.
That is a terrifying statistic. It totally reframes that 57% retention rate. They aren't just staying because they're deeply fulfilled. Many are clinging to their jobs out of sheer self-preservation because they know how incredibly cold it is outside the corporate walls.
It creates a hostage situation in some respects, but the Eurofound report draws a really critical psychological distinction that we need to unpack to fully understand this dynamic. It's the measurable difference between motivation at work and motivation to stay employed.
I need you to break that down for me because those sound like the exact same thing.
We intuitively assume that if someone hates their daily job, they want to retire, and if they love their daily job, they want to delay retirement. But the research shows human motivation is not that linear. Older workers frequently report very high motivation at work. They find their daily tasks meaningful, they are highly engaged with their teams, they are reliable, and they take pride in their expertise. But that high daily engagement does not automatically translate to a high motivation to stay employed past their statutory pension age.
So they might love being an engineer on a Tuesday, but they still absolutely want to be done being an engineer by their 65th birthday.
Precisely. In countries with strong social safety nets, like Germany, studies show that even highly motivated, highly valued workers still want to retire early because of a cultural preference for self-determination. They want the freedom to control their own time, which they view as a higher priority than the satisfaction of the work itself.
So for an employer, this means you can't just rely on the job being okay or even good to retain your older talent. If you want them to stay past 65, you have to fundamentally rethink the working conditions to make them want to surrender their freedom.
And this ties directly into a fascinating piece of localized data from a Belgian temp agency called Federgon. They surveyed over 6,400 temporary workers across various demographics. When they isolated the responses from the over 64 demographic, their primary motivation for taking on temporary flexible jobs wasn't just to supplement their pension.
Really? What was it?
The number one reason they cited, by a significant margin, was the happiness of working. It was followed closely by a desire to contribute to society and the psychological need to feel valued.
That data point really shatters a lot of the cynical stereotypes about older workers just hanging on for a paycheck. It shows that for many retirees, work provides a profound sense of identity, structure, and social connection. It's not just economic survival, it's fundamental psychological well-being.
It is, but we must be very careful not to romanticize that finding because it depends entirely on the nature of the work. If you are a high-level marketing consultant or an architect, working a flexible schedule at 68 sounds intellectually stimulating. If you are a roofer, a warehouse packer, or an intensive care nurse, working at 68 sounds like physical torture.
Which brings up a glaring anomaly I noticed in the Eurofound data. The data clearly shows that job quality, meaning autonomy, physical safety, and flexibility, is remarkably high for older women who are still in the workforce. My initial thought was, wow, are employers suddenly treating older women incredibly well? But that doesn't seem right. Why is job quality reported so high for this specific group?
It is a statistical illusion caused by a phenomenon known as the healthy worker effect, or more broadly, survivorship bias.
Okay, survivorship bias. Like the World War II planes, where they only studied the bullet holes on the planes that made it back, ignoring the ones that were shot down. How does that apply to older female workers?
It means the data is heavily skewed by who is left in the survey pool. Workers in poor quality, physically demanding, or highly stressful jobs, which disproportionately affect women in certain low-wage sectors like commercial cleaning, elder care, and hospitality, are often pushed into early retirement due to chronic health issues, musculoskeletal injuries, or severe burnout. They literally cannot continue working.
Ah, I see. So the only women who are physically and mentally capable of remaining in the workforce into their late 60s are those who already happen to have high-quality, flexible, well-paying desk jobs to begin with.
Exactly. When researchers survey the 68-year-old women who are still employed, they report fantastic job quality, but it's only because the thousands of women with terrible, grinding jobs were physically forced to drop out of the labor market 5 or 10 years earlier. It is a vital reminder that policies aimed at prolonging working life must account for the physical toll of different professions, or they risk deeply exacerbating socioeconomic inequalities.
And this tension between those who want to work, those who need to work, and those who physically can't, is creating massive legal friction right now. We're seeing laws encouraging delayed retirement colliding head-on with corporate policies that mandate early exit. Look at Ireland right now.
The deferral law.
Yes, the government passed a new law allowing workers to voluntarily defer, claiming their state pension up to age 70, incentivizing them to stay. But this is clashing directly with thousands of private employment contracts that have mandatory retirement ages hardwired at 65.
Yes, the recent Irish Supreme Court case, Malice v. Minister for Justice, directly addressed this exact collision.
Malice was challenging the mandatory retirement age of 60 for certain public servants, arguing it was age discrimination, especially when the state is pushing the general retirement age higher.
And while the Supreme Court ultimately upheld that mandatory retirement ages are permissible if they are objectively and reasonably justified by a legitimate aim like intergenerational fairness or maintaining a healthy age structure in a specific workforce, the broader legal writing is on the wall. From an employment equality perspective, as the state actively encourages and financially incentivizes deferral to 70, corporate mandates of 65 are going to face insurmountable legal, social, and demographic pressure. 70 is rapidly, undeniably becoming the new 65.
But the smartest corporations aren't waiting for the Supreme Court to force their hand. They are innovating their HR structures right now to capture this talent.
Exactly. Forward-thinking companies view the aging workforce not as a liability to manage, but as an asset to leverage through flexible design. Look at France's Orange Group, the multinational telecom giant. They recognized the brain drain they were facing and created a highly structured senior part-time scheme.
I read about this. Workers can volunteer for a transition phase lasting up to 60 months, 5 full years before their official retirement date. During this phase, they significantly reduce their working hours, but the company maintains a pathway that protects their full pension rights. It's an internal corporate version of the Spanish flexible retirement decree.
Or consider the Netherlands, which has pioneered the use of generation pacts within collective bargaining agreements.
I thought this was such a brilliant, holistic concept. Explain how a generation pact works.
A generation pact is designed to solve the needs of the older worker and the younger worker simultaneously. An older worker is allowed to reduce their hours, say, scaling back to working 80% of a full-time schedule. They are paid for 80% or 90% of their time, but the critical feature is that the employer continues to fund 100% of their pension accrual.
So the older worker gets their time back without sacrificing their final retirement security.
Yes. And the company then takes those freed up hours and the saved salary budget and is contractually obligated to use them to hire young, permanent employees.
It's an intergenerational solidarity scheme. It phases the older, expensive worker out gently, preserves their knowledge as they mentor the new hire, and opens the door for youth employment in an economy that might otherwise be stagnant.
It is a perfect example of structural macroeconomic adaptation. It requires complex negotiation and collective bargaining, but it elegantly solves multiple demographic problems simultaneously.
But we have covered a massive amount of ground today. From the reverse compound interest of the NBER data, to the punitive malice in Belgium, the 6-month bonuses in Spain, the tax revolutions in Greece, and the corporate generation pacts in the Netherlands. What does this all mean for you, the listener? Let's bring this all together into something actionable.
It means that the old, clean binary of being either a worker or a retiree is dead. Driven by the absolute necessity of demographic survival, governments across the globe are deploying heavy sticks like Belgium's 156-day minimums and steep lifetime penalties, and incredibly juicy carrots like Spain's 25% bonuses, Greece's tax abolitions, and the US delayed retirement credit, all with a single unified goal: to keep you economically active and formally declared in the labor market.
Whether you are prepping for a board meeting on HR policy, advising clients on wealth management, or just mapping out your own personal future, you have to account for this new, expansive hybrid phase of life. If you are planning to work into your late 60s or even your 70s, you aren't just a statistical anomaly or a workaholic anymore. You're a part of a massive, heavily incentivized demographic shift. The off-ramp is getting much, much longer, and it's going to be paid with part-time contracts, mandatory transition periods, and highly complex pension math that rewards those who understand the rules.
And if we look even further down the road, extrapolating from the policies we've analyzed today, this shift suggests a profound, paradigm-altering possibility for the future of society. As bridge employment normalizes and the line between work and retirement blurs entirely, we might see the complete abolition of retirement age as a legal concept.
Whoa, what do you mean, abolishing the retirement age entirely?
Think about the underlying logic of the current system.
Yeah.
Right now, your right to state support and a pension is tied arbitrarily to the year you were born. But as technology, workplace safety, and medicine advance, chronological age is becoming an increasingly unreliable indicator of a person's capability or their need for support. Imagine a future where state support isn't based on your birthday at all, but is instead based entirely on continuous biometric health assessments and the specific physiological toll of your career.
So you're saying a commercial roofer's body might be completely finished at 55, and the state recognizes that physiological reality and grants them full retirement, while a software engineer or podcaster might be perfectly healthy and cognitively sharp at 75, so the state expects them to continue participating in the flexible economy.
Exactly. What if, in 20 years, the government or your employer never asks the question, "How old are you?" but instead asks, "What is your current capacity?"
That is a wild thought. We move from a rigid chronological retirement system to a dynamic physiological one. It makes perfect sense when you look at the survivorship bias data we talked about earlier.
It is the logical, unavoidable conclusion of abolishing the hard stop. We are redesigning society to focus on capacity rather than age.
A physiological retirement system. Something for all of you to mull over as you audit your own long-term plans.
But for now, as you look toward your own future, you might want to cancel the order for the sheet cake and tell them to hold off on engraving that gold watch, because your off-ramp is going to look a lot different and probably last a lot longer than you originally thought.
Thanks for joining us on this exploration.
We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.